Captain, if that human touches your flight controls, I am filing a formal objection. Captain Lyra Voss looked from her security officer to the man standing 20 feet away beside the North Star's boarding gate. Caleb Walker did not look like someone worth filing paperwork over. He was 42, white, human, about 6 feet tall, with short brown hair, a worn gray flight jacket, and one small travel bag resting beside his boots. He was drinking coffee while studying the departure board, as though the entire station had forgotten to become interesting. My pilot walked out 90 minutes before launch, Lyra said. Every replacement on this station wants twice the contract rate. Walker does not. The security officer handed her a tablet. That is not what concerns me. Caleb's civilian record appeared clean. Flight certification, freight experience, medical clearance, navigation qualification. Then Lyra reached the middle of his timeline. 16 years were nearly empty. Where are the records? Locked. By whom? Terran authority. Lyra looked toward Caleb again. He noticed her staring and raised his coffee slightly, almost like a greeting. Not exactly the behavior of a dangerous mystery. Unfortunately, the North Star had a delivery window closing in 2 hours. Mysteries were cheaper than penalties. Lyra approached him. Caleb Walker? Captain Voss. You know the graveyard reach route? I know the charts. That was not my question. Caleb considered her for a moment. Then yes. Lyra stopped. Most civilian pilots avoided even saying the region's name without complaining about insurance rates. You have flown near it. Near enough. Another answer that sounded complete until you thought about it. Lyra handed him the tablet. 16 years are missing. Caleb glanced at the record. They were there when I lived them. My security officer is not amused. Neither is mine. Lyra almost smiled, then remembered she was interviewing him. Military service? Caleb's expression changed so slightly she might have imagined it. Government work. Doing what? Mostly flying. Mostly. He looked toward the North Star. Captain, your departure window closes in 1 hour and 47 minutes. You need a pilot. I can fly your ship. Everything else can wait until we are not paying docking fees. Lyra disliked his confidence. She disliked even more that he was right. One unauthorized maneuver, and you lose the controls. Fair. One hidden detail that endangers my crew, and you leave at the next port. Also fair. 10 minutes later, Caleb entered the North Star's cockpit. Chief Engineer Rovan looked up from his console and stared openly. His blue-gray features tightened. That is the replacement. That is the replacement, Lyra said. Rovan examined Caleb's ordinary flight bag. He brought less equipment than my maintenance apprentice. Caleb sat in the pilot's seat. Your apprentice probably owns nicer things. Rovan blinked. Lyra turned away before either male noticed her amusement. Caleb began the pre-flight sequence. His hands moved slowly across unfamiliar controls. No hesitation. No unnecessary motion. Then he stopped. Your port stabilization system was recalibrated recently. Rovan's expression sharpened. Yesterday. You should check it again. Why? The neutral alignment is off by 0.4 degrees. Rovan stared at his instruments. Diagnostics say perfect. Caleb nodded. Then I am probably wrong. That answer irritated the engineer more than an argument would have. Before Rovan could respond, an elderly alien passing the open bridge entrance suddenly stopped. His faded uniform carried decorations Lyra recognized from the last interstellar war. The veteran stared at Caleb. His face lost color. Caleb slowly looked up. For the first time, the quiet human stopped looking ordinary. The veteran stepped backward and whispered, Walker. Caleb said nothing. The old pilot's eyes moved toward Lyra. Captain, where did you find him? Lyra frowned. You know my pilot? The veteran kept staring at Caleb as if looking at a memory that had learned to breathe again. Then he said the words that made even Rovan fall silent. I watched his squadron disappear. The veteran left before Lyra could get another answer from him, and Caleb Walker made no attempt to stop him. That bothered her almost as much as the warning itself. 30 minutes later, the North Star cleared the station and entered open space, but the bridge remained unusually quiet. Rovan finally broke the silence. Your squadron disappeared? Caleb kept his attention on the departure corridor. Apparently. That is not a normal response. It happened a long time ago. Lyra watched him from the command station. You knew that veteran. I recognized him. From where? Caleb adjusted their heading by half a degree. Another lifetime. Rovan made an irritated clicking sound. Humans have only one lifetime. Caleb glanced at him. That is what makes the phrase useful. Lyra almost interrupted, but Rovan was already annoyed enough for both of them. The engineer moved behind Caleb's chair and examined the flight display. Your approach angle is inefficient. By how much? 0.6%. I can live with that. The North Star is not your human shuttle. She weighs almost 14,000 tons fully loaded. Caleb nodded. I noticed she was difficult to carry. Rovan stared at him. Lyra looked away before her expression betrayed her. 20 minutes passed without incident. Then Caleb rested his fingertips against the side of the pilot's seat. His eyes narrowed slightly. Rovan, how long has the secondary cooling regulator been installed? The engineer folded his arms. 3 years. Replace it at the next stop. Why? It is drifting. Rovan checked his console. No. It is operating at 99.7% efficiency. All right. Caleb returned his attention to the stars. Rovan blinked. That is all. You asked why? I told you. You are wrong. Could be. The alien engineer clearly hated that answer. He opened a deeper diagnostic, apparently determined to prove it. Every result showed normal operation. There, Rovan said. Perfectly stable. Caleb nodded. Then we are lucky. Lyra leaned toward him. What exactly did you notice? A vibration. I do not feel anything. It only appears above 68% thrust. Rovan checked the engine load. They were at 71%. His confidence weakened. That could come from dozens of systems. Yes. So why the regulator? Caleb tapped the armrest once. Wrong rhythm for the pumps. Too regular for cargo shift. Too soft for the main coolant assembly. Rovan stared at him, then left the bridge without another word. 12 minutes later, his voice came through the intercom. Captain. Lyra answered. Report. A pause followed. The regulator housing is stable, but one internal bearing is running 11 degrees above specification. Lyra looked at Caleb. He was calmly checking their next navigation point. Would it have failed, she asked. Not immediately, Rovan admitted. But under continuous load, possibly before our destination. Another pause. I am replacing it. Caleb reached for his coffee. When Rovan returned, his pride had clearly suffered more damage than the component. He placed the faulty bearing beside Caleb. You have never flown the North Star. Correct. You could not know what her normal vibration feels like. Correct. Then explain how you identified this. Caleb considered the question. Machines complain before they quit. Rovan's eyes narrowed. That sounds like something people say when they do not want to explain themselves. That is probably why I like it. Lyra stepped closer to the pilot station. Where did you learn to read a ship that quickly? Caleb's expression became distant for just a moment. On ships where waiting for an alarm was considered late. Before Lyra could ask what that meant, Caleb suddenly turned toward the long-range sensor display. A tiny fluctuation had appeared nearly 60 miles ahead. The navigation computer labeled it insignificant. Caleb set down his coffee. Captain. Lyra recognized the change in his voice immediately. What? His hand moved toward manual control. I need the ship for 5 seconds. 5 seconds? Lyra asked. For now. Caleb Walker switched the North Star to manual control before she could approve it. Rovan snapped upright at engineering. Human, what are you doing? Caleb reduced forward thrust and rolled the 14,000-ton freighter 3 degrees to port. Moving. I can see that. Lyra stepped toward the pilot station. Caleb, return control. 3 seconds. That is an order. 2. The long-range display still showed nothing except the tiny fluctuation the computer had dismissed as background noise. Lyra reached for her command override. Then every navigation alarm on the bridge activated at once. The insignificant distortion expanded across the sensors as a dense stream of metallic debris crossed their original route at tremendous speed. The North Star was already moving away from it. The debris passed nearly 4 miles to starboard, close enough for the sensors to identify fragments of an abandoned communications platform, but far enough that the ship never entered emergency avoidance. Caleb restored their heading. 5 seconds. Nobody spoke. Rovan checked the sensor history twice. The navigation computer detected that field after you moved. Yes. 3.1 seconds after. Sounds about right. Rovan turned toward him. That is not possible. Caleb picked up his coffee. You have said that twice today. Lyra did not share his amusement. You violated a direct order. Caleb looked at her. Yes. You also prevented the computer from making an emergency correction with almost no margin. Also yes. Do you always make captains this angry? Usually not on the first day. Lyra stared at him long enough to remove the humor from his expression. Where did you learn that maneuver? It was not a maneuver. Do not do that. Do what? Make something impossible sound ordinary. Rovan enlarged the flight record. Captain, look at his correction. The North Star's movement appeared beside the automated solution calculated moments later. The two routes were nearly identical, except Caleb had started earlier and used less thrust. Rovan searched the maneuver database. One result appeared, buried inside an obsolete military archive. His face changed. This correction pattern has a designation. Caleb stopped drinking. Lyra noticed. Read it. Rovan hesitated. Emergency displacement procedure. Terran military flight doctrine. Archive date 24 years ago. Lyra slowly turned toward Caleb. Civilian freight training? Not exactly. Government work? Caleb said nothing. You told me you mostly flew. I did. Apparently the word mostly is carrying a great deal of weight. Caleb returned his coffee to the holder. Lyra stepped closer. Where did you learn military emergency displacement? His eyes remained on the stars. Somewhere I do not talk about. Rovan made an irritated sound. Convenient. Not really. For the first time, Caleb's voice carried something colder than humor. The bridge fell quiet. Lyra remembered the old veteran at the station and the way he had stared at Caleb. She remembered 16 years hidden behind Terran security. One strange detail could be coincidence. Two could be luck. Three formed a pattern. Before she could press him further, the communications console emitted a low tone. Rovan checked the receiver. Weak transmission ahead. Another tone followed, then another, spaced with mechanical precision. Caleb went completely still. Lyra watched the color drain slightly from his face. This was not the focused reaction he had shown toward the debris. This was recognition. Rovan adjusted the receiver. No civilian identification. The protocol is ancient. Caleb spoke without turning. Turn it off. Lyra narrowed her eyes. Why? Because nothing should still be broadcasting on that frequency. Rovan looked at him. You recognize it? Caleb stared at the communications panel as the signal repeated. Three short tones. One long. Then silence. Lyra stepped beside him. Caleb, where have you heard that before? He finally looked at her, and for the first time since she hired him, the quiet human seemed genuinely unsettled. Graveyard Reach. Caleb did not explain the name. He reached toward the communications panel, but Lyra placed her hand over the controls first. You are not turning anything off until I know what we are hearing. Caleb looked at her. Captain, that frequency belonged to a military guidance network. Rovan leaned closer to his display. Belong. It was decommissioned more than 20 years ago. Then why is it transmitting now? Caleb's answer came quietly. That is what concerns me. Lyra ordered Rovan to isolate the signal without responding to it. The engineer worked quickly, stripping away static until the pattern became clear. Three short tones. One long. Hey. Pause of exactly 4 seconds. Then the sequence repeated. Rovan frowned. There is information buried underneath. Caleb's expression tightened. Do not decode it. Lyra turned toward him. You recognize the frequency, the pattern, and now you know there is embedded data. You are running out of ways to call this coincidence. Caleb remained silent. Rovan began the decode anyway. A string of obsolete navigation symbols appeared across the screen. Most meant nothing to Lyra. One did. It was a route marker. It is giving us coordinates, she said. No, Caleb replied. It is checking ours. Rovan looked at him sharply. How would you know that? Caleb stared at the repeating pattern. Because the first pulse asks for position. The long tone requests authentication. Lyra felt the pieces shifting again. And you know the authentication protocol? Caleb did not answer. That was answer enough. She stepped closer. Who taught you? People who are not here anymore. The humor had vanished from his voice. Lyra considered pressing harder, but the North Star's proximity alert interrupted her. A small civilian relay station appeared on their route, less than 30 miles ahead. It was old, barely staffed, and useful only for navigation updates. Lyra made the decision immediately. We dock. I want current charts before we go anywhere near that signal. Caleb nodded, almost relieved. 20 minutes later, the North Star settled beside the relay platform. Lyra expected the stop to calm everyone. Instead, it made things worse. While Rovan downloaded updated navigation data, Caleb remained near the boarding corridor. An elderly alien pilot entered from the station. He wore a faded civilian coat, but the military insignia stitched beneath the collar was unmistakable. The alien walked past Caleb, stopped, then slowly turned around. Falcon 3. Caleb's face became unreadable. Lyra heard the call sign clearly. "You have the wrong man," Caleb said. The veteran stared at him. "I remember your voice. A lot of humans sound alike. Not over a collapsing guidance channel." Rovan looked up from his tablet. Lyra stepped between them. "You know my pilot?" The veteran ignored the question. His eyes remained fixed on Caleb. "We heard your flight group for hours. Then the channel went silent." Caleb lowered his voice. "That was a long time ago. Not long enough to forget." The veteran looked at Lyra. "Captain, if he wants to leave his past alone, let him." Then he walked away. Lyra waited until the corridor door closed. Falcon 3. Caleb picked up his travel bag. Old mistake. Military call signs are not mistakes. Sometimes surviving them feels like one. For once, Lyra had no immediate response. Rovan broke the silence from the navigation console. "Captain, updated charts are loaded. There is something strange." Lyra joined him. The modern route showed no active military infrastructure anywhere nearby. Yet the mysterious transmission was still appearing on the North Star's receiver. "Stronger now. We are docked," Rovan said. "Our position is fixed. Why is the signal increasing?" Caleb slowly turned toward the display. The repeating tones stopped. A single clear pulse replaced them. Then words appeared across the communications screen in an obsolete Terran military format. Rovan read them aloud. "Identity pattern detected. Awaiting flight authentication." Lyra looked at Caleb. He was no longer pretending not to understand. "It found you," she said. Caleb stared at the message. "No, Captain." His voice was barely above a whisper. "It remembered me." Lyra waited until the relay station released the North Star before confronting Caleb again. The moment they cleared docking control, she transferred the ship to Rovan and opened the personnel archive at her command station. 16 missing years, she said. Caleb remained beside the pilot chair. "We already discussed that." "No. I asked questions. You avoided them." She entered his identification into an interstellar employment registry. Civilian records appeared immediately. She switched to Terran military archives. The screen paused, then displayed a restriction notice. Terran command authorization required. Rovan slowly turned from engineering. "That is unusual." Caleb sighed. "Captain, close it." "Why?" "Because whatever you are looking for will not help us fly this ship." "An abandoned military network recognized you. A veteran called you Falcon 3. Another claimed your squadron disappeared. I think your history has become relevant." Caleb looked toward the forward display. "Not in the way you think." Lyra submitted her captain credentials. Access denied. She tried an older coalition archive. This time a damaged record appeared for less than 2 seconds before locking itself. She caught only 4 words. "Walker, Caleb. Flight operations. You were military." Caleb did not deny it. For a while, Rovan made a disbelieving sound. 16 years is not a while. Caleb glanced at him. "It feels shorter afterward." Lyra stood. "Were you stationed in Graveyard Reach?" Silence. "Caleb, Captain, there are questions that change nothing once answered. They change whether I trust the man flying my crew." That reached him. Caleb looked at her for several seconds. "I flew there." Lyra felt satisfaction for exactly 1 moment. Then the navigation console sounded. Rovan turned back to his station. "Captain, our course just changed." Lyra crossed the bridge. A new route had appeared without authorization, bending away from the commercial lane toward the edge of Graveyard Reach. "Rejected." Rovan entered the command. The route disappeared. 2 seconds later, it returned. Again. He rejected it. It returned again. Caleb moved beside him. "Disconnect the external navigation receiver." Rovan did. Nothing changed. The North Star began turning. Lyra felt the deck shift beneath her feet. "Who has control?" "Not me," Rovan said. Caleb stared at the route. Something in his posture changed. "Cut automated guidance." Rovan tried. "Lock. Then isolate the navigation core from the flight bus. That will remove every automatic correction system." "Yes." Rovan looked at Lyra. She nodded. "Do it." The automated route vanished. but the North Star continued drifting toward the forbidden sector. Caleb dropped into the pilot chair and took manual control. Thrusters responding. Main engines responding. We still have the ship. Lyra stood beside him. You recognize those coordinates? Caleb said nothing. Do not give me another half answer. His eyes stayed on the display. I know where it is taking us. Rovan enlarged the old charts. The destination lay nearly 400 miles inside a region marked as unstable and abandoned. What is there? He asked. Caleb's hands tightened slightly around the controls. There used to be a military navigation hub. Lyra felt the final piece settle into place. The same network that remembered you. Yes. Why would it pull us there? It should not. That is not comforting. It was not intended to be. A new message appeared across the navigation display. The obsolete Terran symbols meant nothing to Lyra, but Caleb read them immediately. His face went still. Rovan looked between them. What does it say? Caleb manually turned the North Star away. The ship resisted for half a second, then obeyed. Caleb, Lyra said, translate it. He stared at the message as if 20 years had suddenly become yesterday. Then he spoke. Flight identity recognized. Return corridor activated. Lyra looked toward the dark region ahead. Return for whom? Caleb's voice became very quiet. For me. Then we stopped following it, Lyra said. Caleb Walker did not look away from the raw flight data. We can try. Rovan turned sharply. Try. Caleb reduced engine output and switched off another automated subsystem. The return corridor was designed to guide damaged ships when normal navigation failed. Once it recognized a flight identity, it started rebuilding the route around us. Lyra folded her arms. How do we leave? Manual flight. Through Graveyard Reach? Around the edge, if the old lanes are still where I remember them. Rovan stared at him. You remember navigation lanes after more than 20 years? Caleb moved the North Star 6 degrees starboard. I remember the important ones. The ship entered a region of uneven gravity. Modern navigation warnings immediately covered the display. Caleb dismissed them. Rovan, raw gravity readings only. Remove predictive filtering. That will make the screen nearly unreadable. Not to me. Rovan looked toward Lyra. She nodded. The polished navigation map disappeared, replaced by hundreds of shifting numbers. Caleb studied them for less than 2 seconds. Reduce thrust to 58%. Rovan obeyed. Why 58? Because 60 will carry us into the first dead zone. Rovan checked the chart. There is no dead zone. Caleb pointed ahead. There will be in about 5 miles. Lyra watched the distance counter fall. 5 miles later, every external communication channel went silent. Rovan stared at his console. Complete signal loss. Caleb continued flying. It lasts 4 minutes. Lyra stepped beside him. You knew exactly where it started. Approximately. Do not hide behind vocabulary. Caleb said nothing. The North Star crossed the silent region while the crew watched the clock. For minutes and 6 seconds later, communications returned. Rovan slowly leaned back. You missed by 6 seconds. Caleb nodded. Getting old. Nobody laughed. A gravity warning appeared ahead. Caleb changed heading before Rovan announced it. Then another. Again, Caleb moved first. Lyra finally asked the question that had been following them since the station. Have you flown here before? Caleb kept his eyes forward. Yes. How many times? He paused. 37. Rovan stopped working. 37 trips through a region civilian navigation considers unusable? It was usable then. Lyra studied him. What were you doing? Guiding evacuation traffic. The answer was delivered with the same tone another pilot might use to describe hauling machine parts. During the war? She asked. Yes. There it was. No joke. No deflection. Just confirmation. Lyra felt her anger change into something less comfortable. Why did your records hide that? Because some operations stayed classified. For more than 20 years? Apparently. Rovan suddenly raised one hand. Something is activating ahead. An old beacon appeared on sensors, less than 12 miles away. It had been invisible moments earlier. Pale guidance lights awakened one after another as the North Star approached. Caleb went completely still. I know that beacon. Lyra looked at him. From which trip? Most of them. The communications system activated without permission. A narrow military channel opened. Rovan tried to close it. Locked again. A sequence of Terran characters appeared. Caleb read them silently. Then a second line followed. Rovin's translator struggled with the obsolete protocol before finally producing the message. Flight authentication requested. Caleb reached for the console. Lyra caught his arm. What happens if you answer? We might get a safe corridor. And if you do not? Caleb looked toward the darkness ahead. The network may keep trying to bring us in. Lyra released him. Authenticate. Caleb entered a 12-character sequence from memory. The beacon processed it. 1 second passed. Then another. Suddenly dozens of dormant navigation markers appeared across the sensor display, forming a narrow white route through Graveyard Reach. Rovin stared at the identification field. Captain. His voice had changed. Lyra followed his gaze. The ancient system had attached a name, a call sign, and a rank to Caleb's authentication. She read the final line twice before looking at the quiet human in her pilot's seat. Commander Walker? Caleb closed his eyes briefly. The communication system produced a clear tone, followed by a message none of them needed translated. Falcon 3 authenticated. Welcome home, Commander. Do not call me Commander, Caleb said. Rovin looked from the ancient message to the human in the pilot's seat. The military network disagrees. The military network is 23 years behind. Lyra might have pressed him, but the white corridor on the sensor display suddenly began contracting. Rovin checked the readings. Captain, the outer markers are shutting down. Caleb leaned forward. The casual pilot vanished from his posture. How long until the route closes? 5 minutes, maybe less. Caleb studied the raw gravity data. Then we move now. Lyra stepped beside him. The modern system recommends reversing course. The modern system does not know where we are. And you do? Caleb looked at the corridor. Enough to get us through. Rovin shook his head. That route is less than 4 miles wide in places. The North Star is a 14,000-ton cargo vessel, not a military craft. Caleb placed both hands on the controls. Good. Military craft were less forgiving. Lyra stared at him. That was supposed to reassure me? No. The outer beacon vanished. Caleb's voice changed. Shorter. Sharper. Captain, I need full manual authority. Lyra hesitated for 1 second. Then she transferred it. You have the ship. Caleb accelerated. Rovin, move reserve power to maneuvering thrusters. Keep main output at 64%. Why 64? Because 65 will be too much in 90 seconds. Rovin opened his mouth, then apparently remembered the previous 6 hours and obeyed. The North Star entered the corridor. Gravity readings shifted almost immediately. Caleb corrected 2 degrees starboard. Hold that power. Rovin watched the sensors. There is nothing ahead. There will be. 3 seconds later, a gravity ridge appeared. The North Star was already moving around it. Rovin stopped questioning him. Next marker is failing, Lyra said. I see it. 2 minutes remaining. We need 1 minute 40. Caleb adjusted thrust without looking at the timer. Lyra watched him work. Every unnecessary movement was gone. Every sentence had become an instruction. He was not reacting to Graveyard Reach. He was remembering it. Port thrusters, 8%. Rovin responded instantly. 8%. Reduce main output to 57. 57. Now hold. A new gravity shift formed ahead, narrowing the corridor. Lyra saw the computer recommend retreat. Caleb increased speed. The system says turn back. The system is wrong. Caleb, the route behind us is still open. For 20 seconds. Rovin checked the closing markers. His face changed. He is right. The last beacon behind them disappeared. Lyra felt the choice vanish with it. Then take us forward. Caleb gave a single nod. The corridor narrowed to less than 2 miles. Rovin, full maneuvering power on my mark. Ready. Caleb waited. 1 second. 2. Lyra could hear nothing except the steady engine vibration beneath the deck. Now. Rovin redirected power. Caleb turned the North Star through the opening as another marker failed behind them. The gravity readings climbed, then dropped. Suddenly the sensor field cleared. Open space appeared ahead. Rovin stared at his console. We are through. Caleb immediately reduced thrust. Check the cargo. Secure. Engines. Normal. Caleb leaned back as though he had just completed an ordinary docking maneuver. Lyra remained standing beside him. You knew every change before our sensors did. Caleb looked toward the stars. Not every change. Enough of them. Rovin's console chimed. The ancient network had transmitted an archive packet before shutting down. He opened it. A roster appeared. 48 Terran flight personnel. Lyra watched Rovin's expression slowly change. "Captain," he said, "I found Falcon 3's unit." Caleb turned toward him. "Close it." Rovin did not. "Why?" Caleb's voice became quieter than it had been inside the corridor. "Because some records were never meant to become stories." Lyra stepped toward the screen. 48 names filled the display, each attached to the same final operation. Rovin scrolled to the status column and suddenly stopped. "Captain." Lyra saw the numbers. 48 pilots had entered Graveyard Reach on the final evacuation mission. 47 had no confirmed return. Only one name carried a timestamp from the other side. Caleb Walker. Lyra read the roster twice because the first reading felt impossible. 48 pilots had entered the final operation. 47 had no confirmed return. Caleb Walker was the only name carrying a verified arrival beyond Graveyard Reach. Rovin slowly lowered his hands from the console. "You were the only one." Caleb looked toward the forward viewport. "The archive only knows who reached a reporting station. That is not the same thing." Lyra asked. "Not always." His answer carried no hope, only precision. Rovin opened the attached operation summary. Large sections remained classified, but enough survived to reconstruct the purpose. Falcon Flight had not entered Graveyard Reach to attack anything. They had been guiding evacuation transports through unstable navigation corridors while civilian systems failed across the sector. There were more than 60 transport ships, Rovin said. Thousands of passengers. Caleb nodded. They needed a route out. Lyra stared at him. And 48 pilots went in to provide one. We had the right equipment. That is your explanation? It was our assignment. Rovin continued scrolling. The operation lasted 11 hours. Caleb said nothing. Your flight group kept changing corridors as the navigation network failed. Still nothing. And you were Falcon 3. Caleb finally looked at him. Close the file, Rovin. The engineer hesitated. Lyra expected resistance, but something in Caleb's voice made Rovin obey. The screen went dark. For several moments, the only sound was the North Star's engines. Lyra moved beside the pilot chair. Why did you never tell anyone? People knew. Your public history does not. That was intentional. Why? Caleb rested his hands on his knees. Because surviving something does not make you an expert on talking about it. Lyra's irritation disappeared. She had spent hours demanding answers because she believed Caleb was hiding something dangerous. Now she understood he had been protecting something private. Before she could respond, Rovin's console chimed again. There is another packet. Caleb immediately looked up. From the network? Yes, but this one is not navigation data. Rovin opened it carefully. A damaged mission log appeared, apparently released when Caleb's old authentication passed through the final beacon. Most entries were unreadable. One survived. Return status. Falcon 3 confirmed. Request for second flight denied. Rovin frowned. Second flight. Caleb's expression hardened. Lyra looked at him. You tried to go back. He did not answer. Rovin found another fragment. Pilot requested replacement craft immediately upon arrival. Command refused entry due to corridor collapse. The bridge became silent. Lyra felt the meaning settle over her. Caleb had crossed the impossible route alone, reached safety, and his first request had been permission to turn around. Why? Rovin asked softly. Caleb looked at him as if the answer should have been obvious. They were still out there. You had just made it back. Exactly. Lyra studied the quiet human she had hired because he was available and inexpensive. Every strange detail suddenly looked different. The early corrections, the way he listened to machinery, the refusal to wait for alarms, the habit of making decisions before everyone else understood the problem. Those were not tricks. They were habits built in a place where being late mattered. Rovin looked at Caleb with none of his earlier skepticism. 47 pilots stayed behind, and you wanted to return for them. Caleb shook his head. Do not turn it into a legend. Why not? Lyra asked. Caleb looked through the viewport toward the distant darkness of Graveyard Reach. Because legends make everything sound clean. It was not. We were people doing a job, Captain. That is all. Then the navigation console produced a soft tone. Modern civilian beacons appeared ahead for the first time in hours. Rovin smiled with relief. Safe territory. Caleb quietly returned the North Star to standard guidance. Lyra watched him surrender the controls without ceremony. The commander vanished. The civilian pilot returned. But nobody on that bridge would ever mistake the two for different men again. By the time the North Star reached the first civilian traffic lane, Lyra had stopped thinking of Caleb Walker as the replacement pilot she had hired in a hurry. The strange part was that Caleb seemed determined to remain exactly that. He checked fuel consumption, corrected their arrival estimate, and reviewed the cargo schedule as though the last several hours had been routine. Rovan watched him from engineering with open disbelief. "You know I am never going to complain about your flight experience again." Caleb looked over. "That sounds unhealthy. Engineers should complain regularly." "I am serious. That is what worries me." Lyra smiled despite herself. The tension that had followed them through Graveyard Reach was finally fading. Modern navigation beacons surrounded the ship, commercial traffic appeared on long-range sensors, and nothing ancient was trying to recognize their pilot. Lyra approached Caleb's station. "Our destination accepted the delay. We arrive in 9 hours." "Good. You do realize I have questions." Caleb sighed. "I was afraid of that. Only one matters." He turned toward her. "Why this? Why what?" "Freight work. Civilian routes. Ordinary contracts. You could probably choose any cockpit in human space." Caleb considered the stars beyond the viewport. "That is exactly why." Lyra waited. "After the war, people kept telling me what I should become," he continued. "Instructor. Advisor. Commander again. Everyone had a plan for the survivor." He paused on the last word as if it belonged to someone else. "Eventually, I realized they were building a life around something I wanted to leave behind." Rovan spoke more quietly than usual. "So you disappeared." Caleb shook his head. "I went home. Colorado first. Then wherever the work took me. I learned civilian ships. Took ordinary routes. Carried food, machine parts, medical equipment, farming equipment. Things people actually needed." Lyra leaned against the console. "And you never missed military flying?" "Sometimes." "Command." Caleb smiled faintly. "Almost never." Rovan made a clicking sound of amusement. Lyra studied the human for another moment. "When that corridor started closing, everyone on my bridge followed your orders." Caleb's smile disappeared. "Because there was no time to debate." "That is not why." He looked at her. "They followed because you knew what to do." Caleb shook his head. "I knew enough. You always make yourself smaller than the facts." "No. I just remember that facts are usually bigger than one person." Lyra had no answer for that. Several hours later, she opened Caleb's employment contract. The original agreement listed him as temporary civilian pilot with renewal subject to captain approval. She changed temporary to permanent and increased his pay by 30%. Then she stopped at the position field. Commander Walker would have impressed clients. Falcon 3 would have made Rovan happy. Neither felt right. Lyra left the title unchanged. When Caleb returned from the galley carrying another cup of coffee, she sent the revised contract to his tablet. He read it. 30%. Consider it compensation for undisclosed qualifications. I thought you were angry about those. I still am. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. Fair. He accepted the contract. Lyra pointed at the position. Field. I left your title alone. Caleb read the 2 words and smiled. Civilian pilot. Thank you, Captain. Lyra looked through the forward window as the North Star joined the steady stream of ships moving between peaceful worlds. Somewhere behind them, Graveyard Reach remained dark, carrying memories the galaxy had turned into history. But Lyra understood something now that no archive could explain. Humans were not remarkable because they never became afraid, never lost anything, or never carried scars from the past. They were remarkable because some of them could walk out of the worst chapter of their lives, refuse to let it write every chapter afterward, and quietly choose what came next. Caleb settled into the pilot seat and checked their route. Where are we going after delivery? Lyra looked at him. Somewhere boring. Caleb lifted his coffee. Perfect.